Hello there, my name is Pavlo Shtermo, and now we'll unveil the top news of recent days. The fourth summit of the Crimea Platform took place today. This time, the participants of the platform will focus on discussing 5 key topics. In particular, it will be about the territorial integrity of our country, the reintegration of temporarily occupied territories, return of civilian hostages held by Russia, as well as Ukraine's success in the Black Sea. In addition, this time the organizers of the event decided to fight the myths surrounding Crimea. One of the key of them, which unfortunately is still stuck in the mind of some experts, is that Crimea historically belonged to Russia. This is not so. Therefore, one of the parts of this year's summit will be devoted to this topic. After all, until the end of the 18th century, the Crimean Khanate was a separate state. But in 1783, Catherine II decided to annex the peninsula and neighboring territories to the Russian Empire, after which repressions against the local population and settlement of the peninsula by Russians began in this territory. Russian rulers have been using this technology not for years, but, as you can see, for centuries.
Сьогодні ми відкриваємо український національний меморіал.
Today we are unveiling Ukraine's national memorial commemorating the tragedy of the Crimean Tatar people. And one day a similar memorial will undoubtedly appear in our free Crimea. This is a symbol of unbreakable will. It reminds us of the 3 tragic stages in the history of the Crimean Tatar people: the annexation of Crimea by the Russian Empire in 1783, the deportation in 1944, and the occupation in 2014. But at the same time, it gives us hope for the future. We are confident that Crimea will be free. This is our common task, and the whole world stands with Ukraine in this struggle today.
It was a part of President's speech at the opening of the memorial to the victims of the Crimean Tatar genocide. This memorial was unveiled during the 4th summit of the International Crimea Platform. The platform, initiated by President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky, continues to be an important international advisory and coordination tool aimed at deoccupying the peninsula. The platform's activities are aimed at improving the effectiveness of the international response to the occupation of peninsula, increasing international pressure on the Kremlin, preventing further human rights violations, and protecting the victims of the occupation regime. It is important to remember that it was the occupation of Crimea that started the Russian invasion of Ukraine 10 years ago, and only with the deoccupation and reintegration of Crimea, the war can be over. And this platform made a result. Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdoğa stated that Crimea should be returned to Ukraine in accordance with international law. He made this remark in a video address to the Crimea Platform. Erdogan highlighted that Turkey has opposed the annexation of Crimea from the start, which has further exacerbated the suffering of the Crimean Tatars, who experienced deportation 80 years ago. Candidates for the presidency of the United States, Kamala Harris and Donald Trump, held the first debate between themselves. I will not retell the entire hour and a half. Here are the main theses. The most important thing for the US is the war against Ukraine. Trump says that he can settle it in a day, but did not specify whether he wants Ukraine to win. Harris replied that the war would be over in 24 hours because Trump would surrender. She assured of her support of Ukraine. Regarding foreign policy, Kamala said that the world leaders are laughing at Trump. The former US president said that he was respected by the Russian Federation, China, and North Korea. Harris emphasized her plan to increase housing affordability and tax breaks. And Trump proposed imposing a 10 to 20% tariff on almost everything imported into the United States. Trump repeated the debunked myth about Haitian immigrants eating cats and dogs in Springfield, Ohio. Harris laughed derisively. Already after the end of the debate, the most interesting thing began. The Washington Post wrote that Kamala Harris wants to hold another debate with Donald Trump in October. The publication, citing sources, writes that the decision to hold another round of debates was made even before the first one. Earlier, the Republican himself called for holding 3 rounds of debates, but it is not yet clear whether he will agree to even second meeting. Registered voters who watched the Harris-Trump debate, 63% to 37%, think that Harris performed better, according to a CNN audience poll. Prior to the debate, those same voters were evenly split on which candidate would perform better, 50% for Harris and 50% for Trump. However, the biggest success of Harris can be considered the statement of the famous singer Taylor Swift, who wrote on Instagram that she would support the candidate from the Democrats. Swift captioned her post as childless cat lady. That's what possible Republican Vice President James Vance called women without children. Another representative of Donald Trump's possible team, the owner of the social network Elon Musk, replied to Swift, "Fine, Taylor. You win. I will give you a child and guard your cats with my life." Well, after the leader have spoken, the teams join, and we will see another 8 weeks of such competitions. And today we have the opportunity to speak with Frank Ledwidge, senior lecturer at the Royal Air Force College and a former military intelligence officer. Hello and welcome.
Good evening, Paul.
U.S. Secretary of State Antony Blinken confirmed that Russia had received Iranian ballistic missiles and announced new sanctions against Iran. "We warned them privately that such a move would mean a dramatic escalation," Blinken said. And these developments increased cooperation between Russia and Iran, threaten European security, and demonstrate destabilizing Iran's influence that extends the Middle East. And I have a few questions about the transfer of these missiles. Do you think that the response from the White House with sanctions is sufficient?
Well, I think that they are not particularly rich in options with respect to this, but the sanctions mustn't be underestimated. Over the last decade or so, those sanctions have increased in scale, and they do real damage to the Iranian economy. And a surprising restriction on what the Iranians can do. As you know, one of the sanctions, for example, was against Iran Air. And I think what that will do is have a rather major knock-on effect of the ability of Iran Air and the Iranians more widely, Iranian government, to operate on an international scale, particularly in the civil aviation world. The US, of course, is by far the most important actor in the civil aviation world. And these sanctions, I think, will, if not put a stop to Iran Air, will certainly seriously restrict its ability to travel worldwide, let's say. Plus, needless to say, restrict its capability in transporting drones or other material, not just to Russia, but more widely in the world, particularly in the Middle East.
And Iran has transferred, if I'm not mistaken, Fateh 360 missiles to Russia, which will lead to even more deaths of Ukrainians, as they will try to destroy our energy system. These missiles have a range of about 120 kilometers. And according to US, dozens of Russian military personnel have already been trained in Iran to use these missile systems. How will they change the situation in Ukraine, maybe on battlefield and with energy infrastructure?
I don't think they're going to have much effect directly on strikes on the energy system, since, as you say, they're fairly short range. The 120-kilometer range you speak of is a maximum range, and more likely these will be used to the rear of the zero line, to the rear of the battlefield. Everybody in Ukraine knows only too well, the Russians have an inventory of ballistic missiles, some of them with far longer range than these. What this will allow the Russians to do is have a rather greater set of options on the battlefield. And I think that's where these will be used, in the sort of rear, as we say, not necessarily the deep rear, but the rear of the battlefield. So the targets will be the same sort of thing, I think, that we use, if I can describe it like that, ATACMS and such, and to a lesser extent, HIMARS, precision targeting of specific, mostly probably military capabilities. I think that's as far as it will go. What it does is, as I said, mainly it gives the Russians just that bit greater capacity. It doesn't really offer them more capability. They can do this kind of thing already, but their capacity to do so in numbers, in bulk, is, I think, running out. So this will backfill their arsenal, if I could put it like that.
Okay, thank you. And will this act of transfer announced by Antony Blinken, as exposed by Antony Blinken, lead to the final decision of the United States, United Kingdom, and other partners to allow Ukraine to hit the enemy rear, the Russian territory, with Western missiles? And if so, should we expect this decision to be announced maybe on the summit of Crimea platform today or in a couple of days later?
I don't know. I don't have any insight to the decision-making within the United States senior echelons. I would say a couple of things, though. It's my impression that they're trying to kick this problem beyond the election. They are rightly or wrongly concerned about escalation and what impact that might have on things like cyber attacks on the US, similar sorts of problems. There's another problem too, though, and I don't think this is adequately realized. Certainly for the UK and the Storm Shadows cruise missiles, I think there's a problem not only from the Americans, but frankly from the unfortunate situation that the UK has a very limited stock of these missiles. I'm sure the same is true of the French Scalps, which are essentially the same thing, because they have not increased the rate of construction of these things. There is no way that anyone could describe the shift in production of such assets into a wartime rate. That hasn't happened. So the UK is left with the problem that it has a limited number of these things. It will have to reserve some of them for themselves in the event that we come into direct conflict with Russia. So there is that problem as well. I don't think that problem impacts so much on the US. They have a fairly large stock of ATACMS, HIMARS, and other HIMARS systems already there. But it is a problem, I think, for the British and the French. And it's never going to be acknowledged that in public because it's the sort of thing that's first embarrassing and secondly rather sensitive.
Okay. That is fairly logical. We can see a lot of ATACMS missiles in the US, but still not enough sufficiency in the production of Storm Shadow and Scalp missiles. Maybe the Germans are still considering Taurus missiles because of that too. Thank you. It was Frank Ledwich, senior lecturer at the Royal Air Force College and a former military intelligence officer. And that concludes our today's video. Thank you for staying with us. Stay updated, comment and subscribe to our UATV channel for more news from Ukraine, because it is your support that eventually matters for us. Goodbye.